Is North Carolina State the sleeper team in the ACC that not enough people are talking about going into the year? They've got their quarterback back. They have an established coach who has been there over a decade. They have brought in reinforcements on offense, on an offense that already returns several guys. And the defense has got a few guys that have come in as well from Power 4 schools. Could NC State be the surprise in the ACC? You are listening to the You Think You Know Sports podcast. This is like our 10th podcast as we continue to go through the ACC. We are going through every single FBS school as we preview the 2026 college football season. You can get a lot more on the Wolfpack and the other teams that we've already done podcasts on youthinkyouKnowsports.com. Instead of YOU, it is just the letter U twice, youthinkyouKnowsports.com, as well as on social media. Our TikTok page has over 10,000 followers, and we are branching out, so the other social media is brand new. I hope you'll join us there. Look, NC State, it feels like, has been the same team for a long time. And look, I'm just talking in general here, but Dave Doeren has been there for 13 years. They're 95-70 in 13 years with him at the helm. That averages out to 7-5. I mean, listen, I've kind of made this joke about Iowa over the years with Kirk Ferentz. And it's like, look, if you just threw me into any year and didn't tell me what year it was, and you said, what's Iowa's football record? I would say about 7-5, 8-5, right? That's how I feel about NC State. And I'm not hating on Dave Doeren. I think that this has been a team that has been on the doorstep of doing more several times during his tenure. And I think they've got a good chance this year. And an ACC that feels, Miami is loaded, right? We just did a podcast and a blog breakdown on the Hurricanes. But behind Miami, it feels like this is a conference that's there for the taking. The number 2 spot is there. And somebody's going to get into that ACC championship game with a chance to possibly play Miami, or who knows what happens with the Hurricanes this year, right? I mean, college football is crazy. So they were 8-5 last year, 4-4 in the ACC. They've never won 10 games under Dave Doeren, okay? They've won 8 games per year over the last 6 seasons, okay? So an average of 8 going back 6 years. They were 50th in points per game last year with 28 points per game. And they had 374 yards per game. That was about right in the middle of the entire country, 72nd. Defensively, they've got to do a lot better. They were outside the top 80 in points per game allowed, which they allowed over 28 a game. And they allowed well over 400 yards per game defensively as well. So what do I like about this NC State team? Well, the one thing everybody is going to point to, especially if they pick the Wolfpack to have a good year, is that CJ Bailey is back at quarterback. He passed for over 3,000 yards last year, had 25 touchdowns, 9 picks. He also ran for 215 yards and 6 touchdowns. The guy can move. If you need him to get outside the pocket and make a play with his legs, he has been able to do that. The problem with CJ Bailey was his performance in really big games, right? And I always judge quarterbacks based on how well they play against the best opponents that they play. That is something I love to do when I go into my deep dive analytics and research. I want to say, look and see what a quarterback did against the best opponents that were on their schedule, against the best defenses on their schedule, against the best pass rushers on their schedule. I want to see how they did when the line blocked well and when it didn't, right? Bailey was 17 of 30 in both games last year against Notre Dame and Miami. So it was 17 of 30 against Notre Dame. He was 17 of 30 against Miami. And neither one of those numbers sound bad, right? 17 for 30, that's above 50% completion percentage. It's above 60%. But honestly, the problem was 1 touchdown and 5 picks total in those games. That's not going to get it done. And look, a lot of teams struggled against Notre Dame and Miami, right? But ultimately, if NC State is going to get where it wants to be, CJ Bailey and this offense are going to have to be able to move the ball, be efficient, take care of the football against really good teams. And Miami is a team that everybody in the ACC is kind of looking up at. They're not the ACC champs. They weren't in the ACC championship game, but they probably have the best roster in the conference, and they played for the national title last year. His home and away splits are wild. I mean, really, I have not seen home and away splits like this in a while for a quarterback that is the non-question starter for a football team in the way CJ Bailey is, right? 16 touchdowns and 1 interception at home, 9 touchdowns and 8 interceptions on the road. He was elite at throwing the ball deep, though. And that's another stat I love for quarterbacks that you're going to hear a lot on these podcasts. He completed 51% of his deep balls, meaning they went 20-plus air yards. They weren't just dink and dunk, and the receiver took it 20 yards by making a lot of guys miss defensively. No, these were balls that were thrown 20-plus air yards, according to PFF. That's where the stat comes from. He had 11 touchdowns and an interception on those. He had the 11th best completion percentage in the country on deep balls. It's hard to beat that. If he can do that again, they're going to be in good shape offensively. And while there are pieces coming back to help Bailey in this offense, I don't think there are enough that people will look at and say in all these preseason magazines that NC State's going to win the ACC, right? It doesn't mean the pieces can't come together, but I don't expect NC State to be picked 1, 2, 3 in the ACC by the media this year. Keenan Jackson is back at wide receiver. He has 40 career catches, okay? They also brought in Victor Snow, a transfer from Buffalo, who had 62 catches, 815 yards, 8 touchdowns last year. We'll see how he does at the Power 4 level after being really good at Buffalo. He did have 5 catches for 67 yards and a touchdown against Minnesota in the Bulls opener last year. Now, things I do like, and I'm going to get to the running back in a second, but there are 3 offensive linemen back on this team. Teague Anderson, Kenneth Smith, Spike Souls is all back. They've also brought in offensive linemen from Miami and from East Carolina to try to solidify this offensive line. At running back, Hollywood Smothers is gone, man. He went to Texas. So probably your best playmaker outside of CJ Bailey, Hollywood Smothers, has moved on to play in the SEC. It's going to be really difficult to replace Smothers as talented as he is. He was one of the hot names on the transfer market. Considered going to Alabama, ended up going to Texas. And that's why Texas is going to be a preseason top 5 team, because they did so well in the transfer portal. So it looks like Duke Scott probably going to be the starter at running back. He had 106 carries, 4 touchdowns, almost 600 yards rushing last year. With the guys who are coming in and back on the offensive line, we'll see if NC State is able to run the football and help CJ Bailey out with a running game. And while losing Hollywood is huge, this is a team that had to figure out other ball carriers last year, right? Hollywood only had 1 game with more than 12 carries in October and November last year. That was against Florida State. So with some of the nagging injuries and different things going on, Hollywood was not the bell cow for this NC State offense. So, Duke Scott did get a lot of carries last year with 106. So we'll see if they can get the running game going the way that NC State would like it to. They were 83rd in rushing yards per game last year. That's got to get better. Defensively, there are only 3 guys back. They're all in the secondary. Assad Brown, Jackson Kick, and Ronnie Royal are all back. There are no all-ACC players, even in the honorable mentions, who are back for this NC State team this year. So the Wolfpack have got to get better defensively. We talked about they were not good enough outside the top 80 and points per game, yards per game, right? Now, they have added a couple of guys. Raul Aguirre from Miami and Dakari Nelson is coming in from Penn State. They also brought in Harvey Dyson from Tulane, who had 8 sacks last year. So there are some guys who are coming in for this NC State team that should help solidify a defense that was just not good enough last year, right? They have got to get better on that side of the football, and I don't think there's any question about it if they're going to go and compete at the highest level of the ACC. Now, the schedule is an interesting one because you open with Virginia in a non-conference game. And I continue to tell people, we talked about this on my daily show. I go live daily on TikTok. When the Virginia-NC State game happened early last year, I said, I hate this because it's a non-conference game again this year. It's a non-conference game last year. And I said, what if this ends up deciding who goes to the ACC championship game? And ultimately, with a 5-way tie that ended up benefiting Virginia and Duke because they played for the title, it did end up making a difference in who went to the ACC championship game. So we will see what happens this year in that opener between NC State and Virginia. Of course, that game is in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and will be played in week 0. It'll kind of be the starter, man. 2:30 p.m. Central Time, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time start between the Wolfpack and the Cavaliers. NC State gets Richmond week 2. They go to Vanderbilt in week 3. No Diego Pavia for Vanderbilt this year. We'll see if the Commodores under Clark Lee remain a real contender in the SEC. App State on September 26th. Then they have got Louisville on October 3rd and Wake Forest on October the 10th. So then they have a bye week. Okay. So look, I know the trip to Brazil is not short. Okay. But nobody has an advantage in that one. NC State and Virginia, those coaching staffs have got to figure out how to handle the travel with an early August game in Brazil, something that not a lot of coaches can even relate to. How are these two teams going to handle that? But there's really no advantage. Somebody's going to handle it better than the other, but both teams have got to travel to Brazil. So the only road game before October the 23rd, again, before October the 23rd, the only true road game that NC State will play is at Vanderbilt. All right. And look, the Commodores have been a lot better the last couple of years. I mean, reaching a level we never expected. But ultimately, away fans can typically find tickets there, and it's not that long of a trip from Raleigh to Nashville. Okay. After that, they play, and this is going through the rest of the schedule, October 23rd at Stanford. That is a long trip, right? The next week, they get California back at NC State. Duke comes to NC State. Syracuse comes to NC State. So the last two games, November 21st, November 28th, at Florida State, at North Carolina. So through November the 20th, okay, the day before they go to Tallahassee, through November the 20th, they will have played 2 true road games. This is an NC State team with a schedule that really sets it up well to be right in the mix, going to Tallahassee, going to Chapel Hill for a rivalry game at the end of the year, and be right in the mix, okay? Now, you could look at it another way and say 2 of your first 3 aren't at home, and you're going to travel a bunch if you count Brazil. But I think the way to look at it is you only got 2 road games until the last 2 games. So they'll play their last home game November 14th. But again, they're not going to a cold weather environment in October either. So, and the last game is in the state of North Carolina, right? So they only play 3 games all season, not in the state of North Carolina. Okay. So I think there are some interesting things for NC State to look at here. They also avoid both Miami and SMU, who I would think, Miami's kind of the clear favorite in the ACC going into the year. SMU is right there, maybe along with Louisville and maybe a few handful of other teams, but SMU is going to be pretty good. They don't play either one of those teams. And I think that works out pretty well for the Wolfpack. So, look, you got your quarterback back. You've got an established head coach who has been there over a decade, has not really been able to get you over the hump yet, but has kept you very respectable. Beat Georgia Tech last year when they were in the top 10. It always is an annoying team to play, NC State. Nobody wants to sign up to play the Wolfpack. So we'll see if Dave Doeren is able to get this team over the hump in an ACC that feels like it's doable this year, especially when you don't play Miami, you don't play SMU, and you play 9 of your games in the state of North Carolina. Only a few true road games, right? So I think North Carolina's got a really good chance. North Carolina State's got a good chance to be really, really good this year. See what the Wolfpack end up doing. Guys, I hope you'll catch the rest of the podcast. We're going through the ACC and ABC order. Once we get through with the ACC, we've got all the other conferences to do. It is May 18th, 2026, but we're going to continue on, and I hope you'll catch future podcasts as we continue on. Also, hope you'll check us out on TikTok, on the other social media outlets out there. You can catch us on any of them with the same username, and on youthinkyouknowsports.com. Thanks for listening.